again, and this is not in defense of Boeing, okay, because I have no horse in the race when it comes to Boeing, but this shouldn't make you fearful of flying. This shouldn't be a conversation about you shouldn't feel safe to get on an aircraft.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to encourage.
All right, so let's get into it. We're going to talk about the South Korean passenger plane crash, which was devastating, and I don't understand what the f- is going on. I don't understand what the hell is happening here with all these plane crashes. People are quick to say it's Boeing's fault, but we shall see. Only time will tell.
Plane crash in South Korea, one of the worst aviation disasters in that country's history.
Here's what we know. The passenger jet operated by Jeju Air, the country's largest low-cost airline, seen in flames after skidding off a runway and crashing into a concrete wall. Look at that smoke.
Just so tragic. Nearly everyone on board losing their lives.
So there's a couple things I don't understand about this. One, normally pilots, when they do a crash landing, they're supposed to dump the fuel, right? I don't know if they did that because the plane did erupt in flames, but maybe that's because of the impact. Number two, I thought that usually at the end of that runway in most airports, instead of a concrete slab, they often have a dirt pile so that on impact, it doesn't do exactly what you just saw. Like, I thought that it's supposed to be like a mound of dirt, basically, because when it's a mound of dirt and the plane does a crash landing like this, or there's like any sort of issue where it needs to have a hard impact landing, it doesn't explode. So those are some of the things that I don't understand in terms of like my limited knowledge of how airplanes work. But having said that, it did come in pretty fast. Normally they also add like they just like spray foam or whatever. I think it's like I forget what it's called, but there's some kind of foam that they're like an anti-flammable foam that they're supposed to spray in a situation like that as well. But that sometimes has a capacity to like make the impact even or make the crash landing go even faster rather than the friction that you get. Like a flame retardant thing. But so the foam makes it slipperier, so there's not enough friction, and then therefore you end up crashing even faster. So I guess that's the reason why they didn't do that. The Kazakhstan crash, they dumped as much fuel as they could, but they didn't have enough time to get it all out, and they had to try to land. Yeah. But ultimately, yeah, there have been 4 aviation-related incidents in 1 week. It's getting pretty crazy out here, but I don't know what the actual reason for this is.
Many questions this morning. Why did the plane land on its belly, and why wasn't it slowing down? Transportation officials saying that the pilot sent out a distress signal shortly before that crash. Now, we've got to warn you here. Some of the video you're about to watch is very difficult to see. Overnight, a terrifying passenger plane crash killing nearly 200 people in South Korea in one of the nation's worst air disasters. The Jeju Air Boeing 737 carrying 181 passengers and crew exploding into flames when it slammed into a wall after something went terribly wrong while landing.
No one tell Cutie, chat, I think she's going to hear about this. It's a pretty big story, especially when there's like a lot. I mean, look, air travel is still incredibly safe, regardless of the many incidents that have taken place. It's you know, tens of thousands of commercial airliners flying all around the globe, and 4 out of that is still, you know, statistically irrelevant. But regardless, obviously, when you see something like this, it's hard to contend with that because you're so powerless. You're usually powerless in most instances, but I understand why people have this additional fear of you know, dying in a plane.
At Muan International Airport. Smoke billowing into the air, cameras capturing these images near the crash site. At least 177 people killed in the disaster, and that number is expected to rise, with officials saying nearly everyone on board is presumed dead. The families of the passengers on board gathering in an airport lounge, distraught as fire officials read the names of the victims. Jeju Air's CEO expressing his deepest apology and accepting responsibility for the crash as the company's top executive. In the video, you can see that the 15-year-old jet landed without its landing gear deployed, the plane landing on its belly at a very high speed.
Like that concrete wall, like I don't understand. It's a very long runway from what people are saying in the chat. And I'm surprised that there's like a concrete wall at the end of it.
Speed, then veering off the runway before slamming head-on into that concrete wall. The plane then bursting into flames, thick black smoke billowing into the air, debris scattered all over the ground. In the wreckage, only the plane's tail still recognizable. Local transportation officials saying before landing, the control tower issued a warning of a bird strike, and the pilot sent a distress signal immediately afterwards. Just a minute later, they say, the pilot issued a mayday and tried landing the plane.
It wasn't a wall, it's a guidance system. Yeah, it looks like there were antennas on top of the wall, so I don't know.
Emergency crews rescuing 2 crew members. In a statement, Boeing saying, "We extend our deepest condolences to the families who lost loved ones, and our thoughts remain with the passengers and crew." And there is still a lot that we don't know here, but we did learn that this particular plane had diverted to Seoul yesterday while on the way to Beijing, but it's unclear why it diverted. We also know that Jeju Air has a very strong safety record as a South Korean low-cost.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like the Jeju Air is like the southwest of South Korea, but like they have from what I understand, they have a pretty solid safety record. Like they have a pretty solid track record.
Carrier. There was just one other incident almost 2 decades ago when a plane overshot a runway. Only 6 people had minor injuries then. Joining us now is ABC News contributor and aviation analyst John Nance. John, thank you so much for being here this morning for this very disturbing story. Based on what we've seen so far, what do you think happened?
We've got a mystery here, Gio. There's no question about it. You don't land with your landing gear up if you have time to put it down. There's an alternate method, even if you've lost all hydraulics. So why did they land with the gear up? Was it a situation where they had another emergency that we don't understand yet in the cockpit, or was there something else, including just forgetting to put it down in the middle of an emergency?
John, another thing that we notice here in this video is that the plane just isn't slowing down, even when it's landing on its belly. Some airports have those crush pads at the end of runways to slow them down. Is that something investigators are going to look at here?
They will look at it, and they'll look at the application of that worldwide, for that matter. But the problem is, with the crush pad, you still got to be aligned with the runway. If they veered off, which appears to be the case, they would not necessarily have gone into a crush pad if there'd been one at the end of the runway.
And John, something else that we've seen in this video, the plane hit that wall, and that's that very disturbing moment that we see that was captured there. It's very possible that the plane would have been fine if it hadn't hit that wall. Why is that wall even there?
That's a good question. I don't know why it's there, and I don't know where it is in regard to the center line of the runway. You don't want anything in the way of the aircraft as you're coming down a runway. And if you're landing gear up, there's no training for us as pilots in terms of how long it's going to take, how much extra time if you're skidding. Of course, you also don't have any directional control at that point after you've dropped the speed maybe under 100 knots. So a lot of questions here, and some of them are extremely serious in terms of future.
And we know that Boeing is actually sending investigators there, of course, because this is one of their planes. When you look at this and you look at Boeing and people look at other Boeing incidents earlier this.
Whenever this stuff happens, immediately, because there's so many moving parts, because there's so much division amongst like different parts, everybody starts pointing the finger of blame at other places immediately. Boeing will say, oh, it's pilot error. Pilots will say, or the airliner will say it's Boeing's issue. We don't know yet. We have no idea. There will be an investigation, obviously, and it's not even a Boeing we investigated ourselves and we found ourselves not guilty type situation at all. I don't think it works like that. It doesn't work like that at all. It's there is going to be government investigations. Usually this is one of the things that like the entire industry would collapse if there was an air of. Like if people thought that this was commercial air traffic was unsafe, then the entire industry would fall apart. Do you understand? Which is precisely the reason why, in order for this industry to continue operating, they have to be as careful as possible. Now, obviously, having said that, capitalism does have a tendency to cut corners. And we've certainly seen that with many of the Boeing-related incidents. There's also the other side of things. I'm not speaking for Korea when I say this, but specifically in America, there have been many initiatives from for-profit commercial air travel companies that want to limit the number of people that limit the number of pilots, for example, to reduce the number of pilots from 2 to 1 pilot specifically, which is devastating and very scary. You have to have a million redundancies in order to make sure that this process is as safe as possible. It's something that the unions have been able to push back on. So it's yet another instance where labor power is incredibly important in protecting people. You just have to, you can't overlook the interest of profiteers in cutting corners, even if it's at the cost of human lives and the cost of safety and then the cost of long-term profit loss too. Because like I said, if people are fearful of flying because these incidents keep happening over and over again, you're not going to have as many people willing to travel. Once there is this, once this boundary is broken and people masses get terrified of flight, they're going to, these industries will fall apart.
This year, is this something that you're going to be saying, well, wait a minute, maybe there's a problem with this particular jet, or no, because it's a 15-year-old jet?
Well, first of all, the 737 is probably the most ubiquitous aircraft out there, along with the Airbus A320. I don't think there's anything that's indicated so far that might be a generic problem with the airplane. Very simple systems. But the thing is, until we know exactly what happened in those last few minutes, we really won't know the application. But I would be very surprised if there was anything that was a problem with this particular model aircraft.
All right, aviation analyst and former pilot John Nance, thank you so much for joining us here on GMA, as always. Thank you. Janae?
And Gio, the questions that you were asking, John said good questions, but all questions that we're all wondering.
Local fire officials and aviation experts say some sort of landing gear malfunction was likely. There's also speculation from officials that this may have been caused by a bird strike. The pilot also made a Mayday call shortly after the control tower warned about birds in the area. According to FlightAware, the Jeju airliner was listed as a Boeing 737 traveling from Bangkok, Thailand, before it crash landed at the Muan airport in South Korea. That's in the southwest part of the country. This is the country's worst air disaster in decades. CNN's Mike Valerio has been following this breaking news story from Seoul. Mike, update us on the investigation and where things stand now.
Well, I would say that probably the most dramatic element, Amra, under the floodlights that are illuminating the crash site here is...
No, 15 years old is not old for an airplane at all, number one. Number two, those things get updated pretty frequently. And not only that, but the reason why you hear Boeing a lot more is because, there's virtually 2 major companies, is Airbus and Boeing. And Boeing has a lot of fleets all around the globe. So you're going to have a lot more. You're going to hear a lot more from Boeing. And that whenever these things happen, there's a lot of media attention surrounding it because it's a complete disaster. You have 200 people just dying with one crash. So it's just, those are some of the reasons why people pay close attention to it, and you hear names being thrown around like this.
Just the urgent effort to try to find...
Also, Boeing is obviously a corner cutter, like a pretty aggressive corner cutter as well in their newer fleets too. And there have been many instances, many high-profile instances where it is directly the fault of the company and their cost-cutting initiatives. But the initial suspicion is a bird strike. But video allegedly showing the moment of the bird strike, one of the 2 survivors told the doctors he had already been rescued when he woke in the hospital. But even if one bird is capable of taking out one of the engines, I mean, there's still so many extra questions here as to like why the landing gear didn't why didn't they bring out the landing gear? Did it, because it's not supposed to affect the landing gear. And again, they have a million redundancies for stuff like this, okay? Like bird strikes happen. They fly around, you know what I mean? It's not supposed to impact the flaps. It's not supposed to impact the landing gear. There's also a second engine. Like planes are incredibly safe. As far as like the million different redundancies built into the process, like and what pilots are trained on, they're basically, Austin is saying, call me on Discord. Oh, hell yeah, Austin is around. Okay, great. I think it's important to hear from an aviation expert, aviation safety expert here in times like this. So I will be calling him right now. Okay. Hello.
You hear me?
Wait, where are you?
Oh, shit, why is my camera on?
Wait, turn it on.
Well, no, I'm at the... Well, I'll get in my car first. Let me get in my car.
Okay, get in your car and put it on horizontal, and then turn your camera on.
Okay, hold on. Just a second.
Boeing's number one PR person? No, neither myself nor Austin are going to defend Boeing unless it's something that is defensible. But I think
Boeing here. All right, nobody's defending Boeing. Let's see. Oh shit. Hold.
Okay. Hello.
Hold on. Let me position my phone.
Boom.
Okay. Well, I'm joining you from my satellite phone. Here at the scene of the crash, I flew out immediately when I saw it.
Okay. Let's not, dude. 200 people died. Let's not make, let's
kidding.
not.
No, look. Here's the deal. The first plane crash was. Have you covered the first one in Russia?
Yeah, I mean that one is very clearly the work of that one is very clearly the work of anti-air. That was a surface-to-air missile.
Right. So the second one was a Boeing 737-800 in South Korea that had some sort of failure, hydraulic failure. This is all speculative for the record, but this is what I think happened. Had some sort of hydraulic failure that led to the loss of the ability to put down the landing gear, which led to the pilots having to do a belly landing. Now, obviously, a hydraulic failure is not a unique to Boeing thing. A hydraulic failure could happen in any aircraft. I'm not trying to defend Boeing. I'm just saying the obvious. So because I don't think it's productive to be like, oh my God, you should be terrified to fly. Because this is what often happens with these disasters.
Yeah.
Think people, you shouldn't be scared to fly. It's still very safe. You're hearing about it on the news because it is so rare. That being said, there was a hydraulic. I think there was some sort of hydraulic failure that led to the landing gear not being able to come down, which led to the pilots having to do a belly landing. Now, if you see in the video, I don't know if you've seen the video, but if you see in the video, there was the flaps were up, which means that they weren't retracted. Usually on a landing, you have your flaps down. The pilots either made the decision to not to have the flaps up, or that was a part of the hydraulic failure, because you need hydraulics to bring the flaps down. And if they're the same system that's tied to the landing gear, I'm not sure how that actually works. But if that system was affected, then they wouldn't be able to bring down the flaps. The other thing I was thinking about is if maybe.
But there's a backup. There's always a backup.
Yeah, there's always redundancies, but I mean sometimes those also fail. I don't know what obviously I would imagine the redundancies also failed, which is why the landing gear wasn't able to come down, nor were the flaps. There's
someone in the chat that's also saying this: the landing gear can deploy via gravity, which I'm pretty sure that's the case, and they also deploy it early enough that they can go and try a second approach, which they didn't.
Yeah, so that's the other thing I'm going to get to. I don't want to, obviously, rest in peace to. I think the pilots probably perished in this if they were at the brunt of the impact. I don't want to speculate to their skill or lack thereof or whatever, but I do think based on the first photo or the video that I saw, and I don't know if was it their first or second attempt.
I don't know if they did two attempts. Did they do two attempts?
I don't know. I
Oh,
heard
the
that
chat is saying this is their second landing attempt. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So and did they, and ask the chat, did they have two working engines on the second attempt? Because I heard from somebody they were on a single engine. Regardless, they were capable of going around. And on the second attempt, I don't know if you saw this, but if you're coming in, so if you're flying in, what the pilots would be trying to do is get the aircraft at as low of a speed as possible when they touch the ground. And you can kind of see that as they're coming in. So what they're going to do that is they're going to lift the nose up and almost get the aircraft to a point where it's basically stalling. So it's like essentially at a very, very low airspeed, and you're just like touching the ground. The plane is incapable of any lift whatsoever. But what ended up happening is it backfired and they drifted too far down the runway. So when they actually touched down, they only had half of the runway left. And I believe this was like a 9,000-foot runway, which is a relatively short runway. I mean, it's not the shortest. For reference, LAX has between a 10,000 and 12,000-foot runway. Burbank has a 6,000-foot runway. So it's not like exactly the Burbank, California, that is. So it's not like the shortest runway in the world. But still, you use up about half of it. Maybe let's say there's 4,500 feet left. You don't give yourself that much of a chance to stop, especially when you don't have flaps and you don't have any, there's no, you have no landing gear. So you have no brakes. So, I think that in hindsight, obviously that's probably an error. They probably should have tried to go around again. But again, I don't know how much fuel they had on board. I don't know if both engines were working. There's a lot of things we don't know, so it's easy to sit here and say, okay, they should have gone around when maybe they were also having a fuel emergency. Somebody mentioned, what's the airline called? Jeju Air or something?
Jeju, yeah.
Yeah, Jeju Air is from what I understand, is a low-cost carrier, and a lot of low-cost carriers encourage their captains to take minimum fuel, and so they may have had a fuel emergency. So there's a lot of things that we don't know, but based on what we see, I think of the things we're most confident in, it's probably some sort of hydraulic failure, and the pilots definitely overshot the spot of the runway in which they should have come down in. So that's what I would say, based on just what I would say. The other thing is, I really don't think this needs to, again, and this is not in defense of Boeing, okay? Because I have no horse in the race when it comes to Boeing, but this shouldn't make you fearful of flying. This shouldn't be a conversation about you shouldn't feel safe to get on an aircraft.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to encourage, because what the media is going to do is you're going to see a lot of every aviation related incident is now going to be reported.
Yeah.
So from engine failures to bird strikes to things that may happen more frequently than you know will be big media stories, because they're capitalizing on clicks and the fear that you have of flying. So that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, no, for sure. So overall, what's your personal speculation on the matter? What do you think is the likely scenario? Bird strike an engine, and then they just maybe failed to deploy the landing gear manually?
Well, so I saw the bird strike. So is a bird strike a factor in this? Because I saw a video of a bird strike.
Mm-hmm.
And if there was a bird strike, then they're working with one engine, and so you can still go around with one engine. You can still fly on one engine. It just makes it harder. I mean, I don't know if you and I flew. So Hasan, this is the 737-800 is the plane that you and I flew in, the simulator.
Yeah.
That is the plane that we flew. And we were able to do a single engine. We were able to fly it with the single engine. So it is possible. And you are also able to fly without hydraulics, but I don't know what degree. It's really hard to speculate because we don't know to what degree the failure impacted the systems of the aircraft. So in my heart of hearts, I want to assume that the pilots did everything that they could, and they're experts. And I mean, they had thousands of flying hours, so I imagine they did everything they possibly could. But I would speculate that, the reason for the overshoot was the fact that they sort of glided it, down half of the runway and ended up, not going around. But they may not have been capable to go around. So it's hard to sit here and be like, they should have gone around. They may not have had enough fuel or something like that, because it's pretty obvious to go around at that point. You're halfway down the runway. You know what I mean? And
why do you think there was a giant concrete wall at the end of that runway? I don't know if it because it was doing a belly crash landing, that maybe it just went out of control and got off the runway. But I thought that normally it's supposed to have a dirt mound at the end of that runway, so that what we saw with that initial impact explosion is not supposed to happen. Is the Boeing plane that we're talking about, does it have the capability of dumping fuel? And is there a reason as to why they didn't? And also, last but not least, the question I have is was the flames that we saw, the fact that the plane engulfed in flames, is that just simply because of the remaining fuel, or does that happen even if there isn't fuel in the plane, is what I mean?
I mean, I think it happens regardless. I think there's as far as I'm aware, I think that even if the plane doesn't have any fuel, I think it's going to explode. There's a lot of other things that could blow up. I have no idea. Honestly, that's outside my realm of expertise. Let me start with your question about the wall, the perimeter wall. I imagine it just depends on the airfield. Like for example, at the end of LAX, it's the Pacific Ocean. And there is a perimeter wall, I think, around LAX for security and things like that. It just depends. It just depends on the airport, depends on what's around the airport. Sure, some airports have probably dirt mounds. Like if you're looking at an airport like Denver's out in the middle of nowhere. And so you just don't, I'm sure there's not as much of a requirement for some sort of perimeter wall.
There's a Boeing 737 pilot in the chat says you can deploy flaps with an electric motor as backup, and the gear hydraulic system A is not connected to the flaps. Hydraulic system B, and no, they can't dump fuel on the B 737.
You can't dump fuel on the 737? Huh.
That's what he's saying.
News to me. I guess he's a pilot, so I obviously don't know. I guess you can't, but you can burn fuel off.
Yeah, you would. Yeah, no, they do not. It says that Boeing 737 all models do not have Boeing 737 all models, the DC-9, MD-80, Boeing 717, and the A320 family, and various regional jet aircraft do not have fuel dump systems installed. I wonder if that's a cost cutting. Do you think that's a cost cutting measure?
I don't know. In the U.S., though, I've heard of various failures and things that occur, and you need to have an emergency landing. And a lot of these planes will fly in circles for hours. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember in the mid 2000s, there was a JetBlue flight that had a landing gear that came down, and it was the front landing gear was twisted. It was a huge live. It was broadcasted live. And I think they flew around for a long time to burn all the excess fuel. So I think typically instead of if you can't dump it, this is what they would do. But I think the problem is they may have been on one engine. So I don't know what the procedures of the given airline would be. But if you're having one engine, you got to land as quickly as possible. I don't know. Maybe that's the procedure. Hey, Hasan, I got to turn my camera off and I just got to go to audio.
Okay.
I got to. 1 second.
You got to start driving? No, it's all good. I mean, we don't have to take up more of your time. I'm gonna go back to the CNN experts. If you hear something that I'm talking about that you have input in, you can hit me back.
But one thing I can say, and the Boeing pilot should back me up on this: don't fall for this is some sort of. I'm not a Boeing. Look, I'm not in the pocket of big Boeing. Okay, but I just am so annoyed. It's not even about defending Boeing. It's the fact that it's just not a productive conversation to have until we know all the facts. The Boeing 737 has been in service for over 30 years in different variations.
Yeah.
So it's not the Max plane was a new variation that had a lot of problems, and Boeing should have to pay for those issues. But the Boeing 737 as a plane has been a very like try and true safe plane over over many generations. So like I don't think like this is reason to like not want to get on a Boeing plane. There's a lot of other factors at play here. Anyway, that's all.
All right. Well, thank you so much, AustinShow, a resident pilot slash
Not
aviation.
in the pocket of Boeing. I actually, in fact, I prefer to fly Airbus. Like actually fly.
Resident Boeing defender in the pocket
No,
of Big Boeing.
I'm not in the pocket of Big Boeing. I promise.
Thank you, Austin. Your Boeing check is in the mail.
All
right. Bye. Okay. That was AustinShow. Like I said, commercial airline pilot, aviation expert. Okay, he has logged flight hours, like FAA trackable flight hours. He is not an actual pilot though. He just knows a lot. And I wanted to bring in my own aviation expert / correspondent and the people that were talking shit about him and his background. You.
2 sets of remains that are of the passengers who are unaccounted for right now. I'll tell you, we've had such a whiplash, chain of events as we followed this story throughout the day here in South Korea. And there was so much hope, Amra, as you mentioned, after the 2 people were found, the survivors in the back of the plane, the 2 crew members were rescued and made it out with their lives. There was hope from a whole host of emergency responders that perhaps a third or a fourth person could be found alive as well. But that hope quickly diminished after the noon hour here in South Korea. So what's happening right now? The 2 survivors are being moved to hospitals here in Seoul. We don't know their exact conditions as of yet, or if they've been able to speak to investigators. But what they have to say will be critical because the voice and data recorders that comprise the black boxes of this aircraft have both been found. So when you combine those 2 elements, plus the 2 survivors, that could paint a more accurate picture because there are elements that are in tension of just what happened here. And what we mean by that is we have a whole slew of people who are involved in the investigation, from government officials that have come from Seoul and also more local leaders like the chief of the fire department, who have mentioned that bird strikes, or a bird strike, I should say singular, could have played a role in a cascading series of events that led to the landing gear malfunctioning. But still, from our analysts who we've spoken to over the past couple hours, it's unclear how a potential bird strike would lead to landing gear not coming down, would lead to the flaps on the aircraft wings not coming up to slow down the speed of the aircraft. And it's not clear why exactly this 737-800 landed so far down the runway, very close to the end of the runway, and why there was all of this equipment near the end of the runway, which is what the plane slammed into when it met its cataclysmic end. So there are still so many unanswered questions. But Amra, as you and so many of our viewers have been following, we're coming off a time of martial law, December 3rd into December 4th. We're now on our 3rd person who's holding the powers of the president because of the impeachment saga that has been going on since December 3rd. So to say that this has cast a new pall over the country, I would say is such an understatement, as so many people are in mourning here across South Korea, Amara. Yeah,
just very difficult scenes to watch as this continues to play out. Mike Valerio, thank you very much for your reporting. Let's talk more about this with CNN safety analyst, aviation analyst David Susi. David, you just heard there from Mike that 2 of the black boxes, the data and voice recorder, have been recovered. So obviously we will be learning more in the coming days. But from what we know, also seeing that video where you see the plane landing, you see that the wheels that are used for takeoff and landing are not out when it comes down. And then we've also heard speculation from South Korean officials that this could have been a bird strike playing a factor in this. What is your initial assessment, David?
Well, there were so many different aspects to this and unanswered questions. I don't see any connection between a bird strike and whether the landing gear was able to come up or down or not. I really can't see that those 2 things are related. However, what can be related is the response to a bird strike. So after you've hit a flock of birds, you may have an engine out, you might have things going on, and that creates a lot of chaos.
I can't stop thinking about that video we watched a few weeks ago about how social ladder system in Korea caused us some smaller crash years ago. Is it possible for some of these things to be happening again? No. I mean, maybe, but I'm pretty sure that they literally took training protocol seriously after that to change like company culture to ensure that they reformed it. Like that was the point. I mean, I'm gonna assume that that's probably not the case until there's enough evidence for it, especially because in the aftermath of that crash, they literally changed the training structure and the communication structure. That was the point that that video was making about the cultural attitudes playing a role in this tragic incident.
Us in that cockpit, as far as how the aircraft is going to land, where it's going to land on the runway, all of those things. You don't have a lot of options if you overshoot a runway by a little bit, which it appears this happened here, is that you're going to hit in the middle of the runway as you go traverse down it. So that can cause that overspeed condition at the end. But there's so many different unanswered questions. And yes, flight data recorder will give us those answers.
Also, the fact that there was equipment at the end of this runway. You know, what you see is this plane landing. It's careening on its belly, and then you see that it strikes navigation equipment there on the runway, hits a wall, and then bursts into flames. I mean, why is there equipment there on the runway?
You know, that's my biggest question that I have is airports are supposed to be designed where an aircraft can land without landing gear. And if it veers off the runway to one side or the other into the grass, that there isn't obstructions and barriers of this type that are close to the runway. In this case, I haven't quite been able to determine yet, but there's no answer as to why that lighting facility, which is a large piece of concrete equipment, is located exactly where it is. There's no reason in my mind for it to be there. So that would be my next question does the airport meet the standard design criterion for an international airport? So those things will be looked at very closely by the investigators.
If there was an issue, David, with the landing gear, being deployed, would there have been a warning system in place notifying the pilots so they don't attempt to land?
Yes, there is. It'll say gear up, to make you remind yourself to bring the gear up as you have a proximity warning to the ground. So they would have gotten those notices, but by the time you get that, if you are in this situation, and let's say, for example, you come in to land, you don't have another engine, you can't make a go around and try it again. So even though you get those warnings, by the time you get the landing gear down in the position that they were in, you wouldn't have time to get them fully extended. So that may be the problem here, is that they didn't have time to make a go around and assure that the gear had been lowered properly.
David, it's remarkable that we're talking about survivors in yet another plane crash here. 2 survivors, we understand they are crew members who were pulled out of this plane. They were apparently found in the tail of the plane. And I want to ask you this because we've been talking about, I think it was the Azerbaijan airline where you had survivors as well, the plane that was apparently...
yeah, it's the safer part of the plane is the back side of the plane, usually. The closer you are to the tail.
Shot down at the skies there. And the survivors from that crash are believed to have been sitting in the rear. Is the rear of the plane the safest part of the...
Good fuck first class law? Okay, bro, chill. Chill, dog. Wait, what? Oh my God.